We're continuing in our study of Days of Elijah, and I like to call this one The Adventures of Israel's Most Miraculous Prophet, because Elijah does do some pretty incredible stuff. We'll be going through about mid-June on this study in here, and I hope you enjoy it. And if you didn't catch up on last week's lesson, it is on YouTube. And that was our introduction to Elijah. Also, last week's sermon came straight from 1 Kings 17, which is the first story of Elijah. And it's interesting that Elijah, we encounter him, and he's a full-fledged prophet. We don't hear about his call. We don't hear about his younger days. We don't have any stories of young Elijah. It's just, here's Elijah. He goes and he speaks to King Ahab, and then there's a drought. And this drought creates quite the problem for Israel. And let's see. Here's your timeline. If you're wanting to, I'm going to show you this again, because it always takes me a while to, even this week studying this, it takes me a while to get this fixed in my mind. That, the time period here that we're talking about is the 9th century before Christ. So Elijah is born more or less 900 years before Jesus. Almost a millennium. Now you think about that. The time difference between us and, let's say, Charlemagne, okay? King Charlemagne, or what we would call the midpoint of the Middle Ages. That's the same distance in time that Christ is from Elijah. So Elijah is certainly, in some sense, a legend, a figure in Israel's history who represents the prophets in and of himself. This is why when Jesus is transfigured, he encounters Moses and Elijah. They're the living embodiment of the law and the prophets. But Elijah operates in the northern kingdom for the most part. Now, he will make a journey down to Mount Sinai, but he is from the land of Gilead, and he is among what's called the settlers of Gilead, which is we'll get to the map here in a second, but he is from that region over there to the east of the Sea of Galilee. In fact, Elijah's home territory is very similar to the home territory of Jesus in his ministry, in and around the Sea of Galilee. Very similar geographically. And I don't think that's accidental at all. Elijah works in contrast to the ruling house of Omri in northern Israel. So if you look at our timeline there, when we get to, of course, we have the United Kingdom under Solomon. This is the north and south all together. This is one Israel. It divides because of a revolt, and so you have Israel, you have Judah. The tribe of Judah splits off. This is where Jerusalem is now. This is pretty much the remainder of all the tribes other than Judah. It's Jeroboam versus Rehoboam, and then you have dynasty changes in here. Jeroboam's ruling house with Nadab is not the same as Baasha's with Elah. That's a different group of people. They're breaking away. It's like a different administration. And then you got the house of Omri after a 7-day rule by Zimri. Omri, Ahab, Ahaziah, and Joram, and then Jehu will take over. That yellow bar there is the ruling family, the ruling dynasty over Israel when Elijah is doing his work. And this is what puts him so prominent for Israel, because that ruling house has a lot of problems. Especially when you get to Ahab, it becomes even worse, because Ahab forms an alliance through marriage with Jezebel, who is a priestess of Baal. And that changes the entire nation, and that's going to set up the showdown that we're going to see in the text today. So when we open up in 1 Kings 18, this is after Elijah has gone to the north up here, and he's gone north of Israel to Phoenicia. Tyre and Sidon are right around here, and this city of Zarephath is right between them. And this is where he goes. This is Jezebel's hometown. He has gone back to her kingdom. I don't mean Zarephath is literally her hometown. I mean that this is her country. These are her people. He has gone back there to hide out. And he's encountered this other woman who is Phoenician, Sidonian. And he actually relies on her. And God blesses her, and God provides for her and him in this drought so that they can have enough to eat. And he is there to call upon God to work the miracle of the resurrection of this little boy, reviving him to life. For that widow to lose that child, it's not only the heartache of losing a child, but it's also the loss of her future. That child will if he dies, he cannot take care of her. So she has stared death in the face at least twice. And because of the presence of the man of God from Israel, she sees that the God of Israel truly is the God that's worthy of worship. She's a contrast to Jezebel in many ways, who is in Israel trying to get Israel to worship the false god Baal. When we enter into chapter 18, the drought has been going on for 3 years. You know, we start to get anxious when a drought goes on for about 3 weeks, maybe 3 months. You know, we get really anxious. But 3 years. This is going to lead to what's known as famine, which is going to cause people to starve. Not only is it going to make your crops fail, but people are going to die. Elijah is given news that this drought is about to end. I'm going to start reading in chapter 18. I'm reading from the NIV. After a long time, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, his palace administrator. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. While Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. Ahab had said to Obadiah, go through the land to all the springs and water, or to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive, so we will not have to kill any of our animals. And so they divided the land they were to cover. Ahab was going in one direction, Obadiah in another. And as Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, is it really you, my lord Elijah? Yes, he replied. Go and tell your master, Elijah is here. What have I done wrong, asked Obadiah, that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death? As surely as the Lord your God lives, there is not a nation or kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you. And whenever a nation or kingdom claimed that you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. But now, you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here. I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave. If I go and tell Ahab, and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. Yet I, your servant, have worshiped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard, my Lord, what I did while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. And now you tell me to go to my master and say, Elijah is here, or he will kill me. Elijah said, as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today. All right. And so this text is a build-up it's a build-up to the encounter between Ahab and Elijah. We're all waiting for the showdown on Mount Carmel. But before we get to that, you have to have this confrontation between Elijah and Ahab. It's very important in what it represents. This figure of Obadiah, and there are some traditions that say that this is Obadiah who wrote the prophecy in Scripture, what we call the book of Obadiah, which is really a letter or a short sermon. Obadiah's prophecy is judgment on the land of Edom. Edom, by the way, on this map would be down off here where you can't see it, below the Dead Sea. Here's Judah, Israel, Jerusalem's right here. There's the Sea of Galilee. This is the land of Gilead over here. Edom would be down here, and Edom, they're the descendants of Esau, the Edomites. Obadiah's prophecy is a judgment on the Edomites. Now, there's a lot of similarity between Obadiah and Jeremiah chapter 49. Now, either Jeremiah is working with earlier literature, and this could be the same Obadiah, or it's a contemporary prophecy that both of them are using, and it has something to do with that time period right before the Babylonian exile. And that seems to make a lot of sense, because the message of Obadiah to Edom is, don't get carried away laughing at the misfortune of Judah, because you're going to be facing the same things yourself. That's the gist of Obadiah's prophecy. And it's a warning. It's a warning to everyone that when Babylon comes in, not only is it going to affect Israel and Judah, it's going to affect the surrounding nations as well. If we say, okay, well, this Obadiah is not the Obadiah the prophet, that's fine. That's fine. It doesn't cause biblical accuracy or historical accuracy to crumble at all. Obadiah is a name that could be shared by two individuals across centuries. What we do know about this Obadiah is he is a palace administrator. He is the major domo of Ahab's palace. And the kings in this time period, in this timeline, are always changing the location of the palace. They're moving it from over near Tishbe to Jezreel to Samaria. They might as well have a tent or a mobile palace because they keep moving it. And again, it's whoever is in power sets up their headquarters where they want to be. Obadiah takes care of Ahab's palace. All right? He's the man you want to get to if you want to get to Ahab. But here's the thing. Obadiah is faithful to the Lord, to Yahweh. And Jezebel, who has more influence over Ahab than Obadiah, is trying to establish the worship of her people in Israel. Now, a lot of this happens for political reasons. And in our world today, we want to divide up these experiences. You have religion over here, you have politics over here. And we pretend as if the two don't mix and match. The ancient world was just a little more honest about interweaving all of that. Religion is politics, and politics are religion. What was different about the people of Israel, the people of Judah and Israel, is that they made the claim, and it depending on where you were, this would either be a political claim or a religious claim, or it would be a emotional claim, but they made the claim that Yahweh is the true God, and all these other gods are false. They're no gods at all. And to make that claim says we don't acknowledge that any other God is like Yahweh. There is no other God like him. It also says that Yahweh has a vision, and he has a love, and he has a concern and a care for all the other nations. Now, sometimes a nation would claim its God, sort of like a mascot. So if you're in Phoenicia, Baal. Baal is the top god in Phoenicia. Over in Babylon, it's going to be Marduk. And then you've got Ashtoreth. Ashtoreth is kind of popular everywhere. But again, you claim this, and they become like little clubs. Israel is saying, no, it's Yahweh or nothing. You either serve Yahweh or you don't. You can't bring them all onto one shelf and just have kind of multiple allegiances. You know those, some of you have those license plates that say a house divided, and it'll have like, OU and Arkansas Razorbacks or OU in Texas. Now that's a problem waiting to happen right there. But everybody's got those, and it's like, there's no allegiance here. And then you get people who are like, I don't really have a team that I follow. Okay, that would have been the ancient world, that people are trying to do that with their belief system. All right? But if Yahweh is different, as he claims, as his prophets assert, if he is the one true God, then you can't put him in the same classification or category as all these others. You have to grow up and realize, okay, wait, there's something different here. So Obadiah knows this, and even though he serves Ahab, he is still loyal to Yahweh, and he takes a risk by hiding these prophets of Yahweh in a place of safety. That will cost him his life. And in fact, it's political and religious at the same time, because what you've got the prophets of Yahweh and the prophets of Baal, and they are at a type of war with each other. To hide out prophets of Yahweh, why this significant? It's like, I took 50 of them and put them in 2 caves. Well, I'm sure there were more than 2 caves in the area. Why not put 25 of them in 4 caves? Maybe you could find one big cave and they could all hang out together. 50s and hundreds are numbers. You'll even see this show up in the Gospels, where Jesus is having the people sit down at the feeding of the 5,000 in groups of 150. Those are military formations. Those are combat formations. I can't be dogmatic about this, and I can't prove this, but neither can anyone else. But there is a sense in which hiding out in that cave means that they are biding their time until they can assert their influence over the prophets of Baal. And the prophets of Baal are coming for them. They know this. This is a fight. And so Obadiah is hiding them, and he's providing for them, just as Jezebel is providing for her prophets. Because she, being a priestess of Baal, if her prophets are in charge in the land, then that's better for her stock. Her stock goes up. Her influence goes up. So Elijah, instead of going directly to Ahab, asks Obadiah for an act of faithfulness, of risky faithfulness. That's why you have this dialogue between Elijah and Obadiah. What Obadiah is saying is, he's saying, look, you are the most wanted man in Israel. Ahab has been looking for you for years, and we're going to find out why in just a moment. He says, he's been looking for you. Now, if I go and report that I've seen you, and then you're not here, that's it, Elijah. My neck's getting cut. So I need to have some kind of assurance from you that you're not going to run off, that the Spirit of the Lord's not going to carry you away. Apparently, this is a thing that the Spirit of the Lord does with prophets, and you're going to see it actually at the end of chapter 18, that the Spirit of the Lord seizes prophets, and they go places. It happens in Acts chapter 8, too, where the Spirit of the Lord moves Philip around, takes him from the Ethiopian over to Azotus. I mean, they get the Spirit, and they got to go. They got to go. In fact, it'll give Elijah some sort of paranormal strength, where he's out running chariots and making his way down to the palace before Ahab. So this is a feature that's known about the prophets, is that they'll get caught up and called away somewhere. So Obadiah is saying, I need some assurance that God's not going to hit your beeper, and the next thing you know, you're off on another emergency. And what Elijah is saying to him is, he's saying, this, Obadiah, this is my mission. My mission is to give the word of the Lord, the prophecy, the news, to Ahab. So yeah, I'm not going anywhere. In fact, you're helping me do my mission. This gets Obadiah then to call upon Ahab. Remember, they were out looking for some hay to feed their horses, which is an interesting little point if you stop and think about it. They're in year 3 of a drought. And what's Ahab interested in? Feeding his animals. He's not worried about his people. He's worried about having enough food to feed his animals. Now, you could slaughter those animals and you could feed people during the famine, but not Ahab. He wants to keep his horses. He wants to keep his stable going. So he's got Obadiah out working to find food for the horses. That's a shameful commentary on Ahab and his priorities. So when you get Elijah up against Ahab, there's a debate. When we go into the text, verse 16, Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. And when he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" Now, the text is showing us a few things. First of all, Ahab is not acting like a king. Kings demand that people come to them in their presence. But Ahab will go to Elijah. That's a way of showing that Ahab is weak. And one of the reasons why Elijah does not go directly to Ahab but works through Obadiah is he wants Ahab to be humble before the word of the Lord. Elijah might be saying something like, "Ahab, you're no king, and you don't deserve the respect of me coming to you. You need to come to me because I'm representing the Lord." Elijah's not wanting this for himself. He's wanting Ahab to show obedience to the word of the Lord. You got something for me, Jordan, or is it the camera adjustment? Okay. Here we have a little picture of Baal in his pointy clown hat. And, we don't have any images like that of God because God doesn't want you making images of him. One of the reasons is that when you can reduce a God to an image like this, then he becomes something you can control. He really does become a mascot. God has always told his people, and he's even written it into the commandments, he said, "Hey, you don't need to reduce me down to an image or a symbol, because when you do that, you don't know me anymore. I'm a living God. I can't be reduced down to one little ID photo." Same way that they're doing with Baal. I mean, you get Baal. There's a lot of different little figures of Baal. And the reason is you can turn Baal into whatever you need him to be. If you need a storm god, he's a storm god. If you need a fertility god, he's a fertility god. If you need a god for crops, he's a god for crops. In fact, Baal is even a god for sailors, of all things. I mean, you just you dress him up. Baal's kind of like G.I. Joe. You would dress him up in different clothes for a different mission. So you've got Marine Joe, Navy Joe, you've got Secret Agent Joe. What's the way you do Baal? You just dress him up in a different outfit and he becomes your particular Baal. This is one of the reasons why Scripture sometimes will say, you have worshiped the Baals. Well, which is it? Is it one Baal or is it multiple Baals? The prophets are saying, it's multiple, because you have all these other names for Baal. Baal of the storm, Baal of the crop, Baal of the earth, Baal of the waters. You've got all these different names. In other words, this Baal is a hoax, and you attach it to whatever you want. So when Ahab comes out and calls Elijah the troubler or the troublemaker, that's actually a pretty strong accusation. He's saying, Ahab is saying, Elijah, you're the curse. You're the one who's caused all this to us. You're the one that's caused this drought. You're the bad charm. You're the loser, okay, that's causing all this because you're cursed. And Elijah is turning it around saying, "No, Ahab, that's actually you and your family that have caused this." So in that little back and forth of language, there's a bit of taunting going on there. There's a bit of debate going on there, where one of the things that they have to establish, remember, Elijah hasn't appeared before Ahab in 3 years. So one of the first things they have to say is okay, let's get this settled. Who's responsible for the drought? God is responsible for it, but who caused God to act in this way? Because he was angered. Because somebody is suffering the consequences of their poor choices. Elijah's saying, Ahab, that's you and your family. You've done this because you've brought in the worship of the Baals. Take a look at verse 18, chapter 18, verse 18. I have not made trouble for Israel, Elijah replied, but you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Notice there that it's plural. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. So what they're going to do is there's a conflict of faith here. It's either Baal or it's Yahweh. There's also a conflict of authority. Ahab, either you've caused this, you've offended God by your worship of the Baals, or as you say, I'm the troublemaker. And this conflict of authority, who has the right to say what is true here? Is it Ahab or is it Elijah? And of course, this is easy for us, folks, because we read this and we like, oh yeah, we know, it's Elijah, right? We know, it's Yahweh. But keep in mind, if you can put yourself in the position of the people who are going to show up at Mount Carmel, what have they known for a large part of their life? Ahab is serving after his father. So for most of their life, they have seen Baal as a real option. Elijah says this is a contest, this is a conflict. Not just who are you going to serve, but will Yahweh still remain God in Israel? So before we jump to the end, let's feel the conflict. Let's feel the tension. There is a question of authority going on there. And these are the same people who have grown up hearing about Yahweh. They know the stories of God delivering them out of Egypt. And that's going to come up in this contest. So we get to the showdown on Mount Carmel, Yahweh versus Baal. Elijah has set this up. I mean, he's a promoter worthy of Don King. If anybody, that's probably a dated reference for a lot of folks, but fight promoter, and he's setting. It's like we're gonna settle this. But also, this is a way of making this public. This is almost like a public trial. He's saying, all right, let's have it out, right out here in the open. All of Israel, you will be the jury. You will be the jury to decide, is Baal God or is Yahweh God? If Baal's God, then serve him. And by the way, notice that Elijah is not afraid to put the options on the table. He's not just digging in and saying, it's Yahweh, Yahweh, Yahweh. He says, I'll tell you what, let's put him to the test. That's a risky thing to do, to put Yahweh to the test. Anybody who tends to do that in Scripture, it does not go well. But Elijah, this situation is so severe that Elijah is willing to do that. So he says, I'll take on all comers. You bring the 450 prophets of Baal. Supplement them with the 400 prophets of Asherah. This is, let's get Jezebel's army out here in the open. Okay? Who's going to be on the other side? It's kind of like, this is really the embodiment of that statement. You and what army? Me and God. Elijah says, I don't have to fight the battle. I'm just here. He says, God will take care of himself. So whether God's got one prophet or whether he's got 101, we're not really sure what happened to the guys in Obadiah's cave just yet. But it doesn't really matter, because this is Yahweh versus Baal, and Baal can bring all of his army that he wants. All of Israel now is gathered as jury. And here are the rules for the contest. Each side gets to build an altar. Each side gets a bull to sacrifice. Each side brings the wood for the sacrifice. But no one can bring fire. So you've got everything except the most critical element to have a burnt offering. Instead, by the rules of this contest, they're leaving the burnt offering, or the fire for the burnt offering, to the deity in question. Let's read the narrative on this. Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, how long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him. Doesn't that ring very similarly to Jesus' statement that you cannot serve two masters? And for some of the people in Israel, they were thinking, maybe it's possible to do a both and. I mean, Yahweh's a good historical God for our people. Baal's kind of the new wave. Maybe we can all live together in peace and harmony, Yahweh and Baal. Elijah says that's not how God does this. Because you can't serve two masters. One of them's God, one of them's not. Let's decide, and you serve that one. The people said nothing. Okay, they are a silent jury at this point. What are they going to say? Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left. And now we have a sense as to what happened to the 100 that Obadiah hid out. But Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I'll prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, I'll call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. That one is God. Then all the people said, what you say is good. Now they're in. Okay. Trial by fire. Test by fire. We'll see. Whichever God lights the altar, that's God. Elijah said to the prophets of the Baal, you choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there's so many of you. Now, I want you to know, Elijah goes into this. He's somewhere between a comedian and a soccer fan or something like that, because he will taunt the other side. He will make fun of them. There's no decorum here. Elijah is rowdy in this case. Go ahead. I mean, there's 450 of you. There's just me. What am I going to do? You pick the bull. You pick whichever one. Whichever one of those bulls looks more ignitable, you take the more ignitable bull, okay? I mean, it's, smaller one. I don't care. It's your decision. I'll just stand back. I'm going to give you first choice. You take the first swing. Go ahead. He stands back. He says, I'll prepare the other one. Then you, let's see. Yeah, Elijah said, choose one of the bulls, prepare it, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of your God, but don't light the fire. So they took the bull given to them. They prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. Something like 3 to 6 hours then they're at this. They're into a big Baal worship, trying to get this thing to light on fire. Baal, answer us, they shouted. I mean, you think about this. Follow the drama. Their faith is being tested in this. Because, and you might wonder, well, why are they doing that then? Well, you see, for most of the world, most of the ancient world, and this still hangs over today, gods are capricious. You don't know what they're going to do. This is true of Baal. It's true of the Babylonian gods. It's true of the Greek gods. And this is the problem, according to the prophets, with all those other pretend gods other than Yahweh. Yahweh is consistent. If Yahweh makes a decision, he has a reason for it. If Yahweh acts, he has a reason for it. Yahweh does have emotion. He can be angered. He can be pleased. But he doesn't do that capriciously. Baal could just be upset with everybody and in a mood. And that's why he doesn't want to help. Or he might just be happy and favorable and give everybody blessings. In fact, Baal sort of functions like luck. All right? And it's like, well, maybe. I mean, if we all clap our hands and believe in fairies, then Baal will light this fire. That's where these people are. Okay? And so what they're doing is not a bunch of people pretending. Remember, these are not rational enlightenment folks. They know that Baal does things, or at least they think he does, but they know he doesn't always do it, okay? It's sort of like Beverly Hillbillies and, Granny's cold medicine. It was like, you mixed that thing up, hung it around your neck, and then in about 7 to 10 days, you'd get over your cold, It's like, it just kind of looks nice, and it makes you think that it works, but it doesn't really work. Whereas God functions immediately and clearly, as you're going to see. So here they are for 3 to 6 hours shouting. They danced around the altar they had made. They're getting all into a frenzy. And at noon, Elijah then, he can't keep quiet anymore. He's given them, that much time. He says, hey, let me help you out here, guys. He says, shout louder. Surely he's a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he's sleeping and must be awakened." So they shouted louder, and they slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for the evening sacrifice. So they're at it for at least another 3 to 6 hours. But there's no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. There's some translations here where Elijah's commentary, his taunting, is a bit imprecise, and some of your English translations will clean it up. But Elijah's basically saying, hey, maybe Baal is taking care of his business. He's got to go. And Elijah is mocking Baal by making Baal seem very limited, frail, and human. I mean, there's a little bit of bathroom humor in this, maybe. Now, hey, if you don't like the fact that a prophet of Yahweh does that, I didn't write the Bible, okay? So take that up with Elijah. But Elijah's in an important contest here. And he's going to take every opportunity he can to show to the people that this God is a joke. And he'll joke about the God to make the point that this God is a joke. Prophets have a way of doing that. They do strange stuff. I mean, if you think Elijah's bad, wait till you check out Ezekiel, okay? He does some weird things, and he gets attention, and that's the point, because you need to listen to the message. These prophets of Baal literally pour their blood, their sweat, and their tears into it. They are taking themselves so seriously, and Elijah's not taking them seriously at all. And Elijah mocks Baal in front of Israel, because that's how he's going to prove his point. He's putting them on exhibit, and he's saying, look here, Israel. This is what they want you to worship. This is what they want you to worship. This is the God that Jezebel's trying to sell you. Sure, you see 450 prophets. You see Asherah coming alongside as a sidekick to Baal. For what? For this? A God who can't even light a fire? Really? Now, it's Elijah's turn. Now, I want you to watch Elijah's approach, okay? Then Elijah said to all the people, verse 30, "Come here to me." First thing he does is he draws them in close. He doesn't say stand back. He says, come on in here. He says, I want you to pay attention to this. I want you to watch everything that I do. I want you to make sure that I don't have any matches on me. I want you to make sure that I don't have a magnifying glass and I'm going to light a fire. He says, you're going to be observers. Come here to me. They came to him. He repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. That's a statement that says people had forgotten God. They're focused on Baal because Baal's the shiny new object. But Baal has just failed. Baal has proven himself to be a huge joke. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, your name shall be Israel. Elijah is participating in the symbols and the story of why God is God over Israel. The 12 stones goes back to Joshua. You're going to take 12 stones from the Jordan River. You're going to set them up. Your kids are going to come by and they're going to say, what's the meaning of this? And you're going to tell your kids that this is God who took us out of Egypt and he made the waters of the Jordan dry up so we could cross over into this land that he's given us. In doing this, Elijah is saying, you've kind of forgotten to tell that story to your kids, haven't you? That's why we've come to this moment, because you haven't done what you were supposed to do. But he's going back to the story. He's bringing it back to him. 12 stones, 12 tribes. Jacob gets his name changed to Israel. With the stones, he built an altar in the name of the Lord. Now, he wants to rig the contest against God. He's going to give God a handicap. He's going to make it even harder to suggest that this is some kind of happenstance, spontaneous combustion. We're not going to have that. They dig a trench around the altar. He soaks the whole thing. He arranges the wood. He cuts the bull in pieces, sets up the sacrifice, fill 4 large jars with water, pour it on the offering and on the wood. In other words, soak everything down. We don't want a random spark. I mean, they are in drought conditions, right? And this water would be incredibly valuable. But go ahead. he says. Soak it. Do it again. Do it a third time. And the water ran down around the altar, and it filled up the trench. At the time of sacrifice, and by the way, Elijah is doing this on the timetable set up by Moses. There's going to be a morning and evening sacrifice. So Elijah is even getting in schedule with what was supposed to be doing. This isn't the special Elijah show. He's fitting it in with the history of Israel. He stepped forward and he prayed. Notice his prayer. Yahweh, Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. Or Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Which, by the way, Jacob is Israel. Prove today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all of this at your command, O Lord. Answer me. Answer me so that these people will know that you, O Lord, are God and that you have brought them back to yourself. That's it. No dancing. No cutting yourself up with swords and spears. No shouting louder. Just one prayer. And the focus is not even to vindicate Elijah. The focus is to show these people who God is. And verse 38 gives us a response. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, licked up the water in the trench. I mean, the whole thing gets incinerated. And there's no dramatic pause here. Elijah doesn't pray this prayer and then they say, well, everybody sat around for a while. There was a moment of silence. And then the skies turned red. No, it's just boom, instantly. The whole thing just goes up. Fire from heaven, which is definitely a sign of God's presence. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, the Lord, Yahweh, He is God. The Lord, He is God. They were silent. They said, this contest sounds pretty good. Now they're making the confession. It's Yahweh. It's Yahweh. Yahweh wins. Is there anybody that wants to make the case? Nope, no case for Baal. Yahweh wins. And that's how this contest wraps up. Now, the price of failure is death in this contest because they have offended God. We'll get into this next week as we look at the aftermath of this contest, both for the prophets of Baal, for Ahab, and for Elijah. But right after this contest, there's going to be an execution of these prophets of Baal. And that's the price that they wanted a war. They were going to kill those prophets that, before we start getting too sympathetic here, remember, they were going to kill the prophets of Yahweh that Obadiah hid out. Well, all right, they punched their ticket and they get this. But before we get Elijah off the hook and everything, let me just tell you, after God is proven to be God, everything that happens after this then is the unraveling of what's been happening in Israel. We'll look at that more next week. Thank you for your patience today. Come back and join us for worship at 10:30 on the dot here online at the West Ark channel.